Gary, you're like a white whale, unicorn, purple, whatever they call it.
Oh no.
You have been leading a people analytics team at the same company, building it for over a decade. If my understanding is correctly, that like
Yeah.
doesn't exist. Everybody plinkos around. There's been people who've been in this space in a while, but no one I know has been building the same team like you have, and you have such a unique perspective because of that. What has that experience been like, and tell us about that journey.
So, and I hit my tenure at Providence last month or so. So it has been officially over a decade. So I've been reflecting on this. You know, I think that I was never quite part of the hype cycle, and I think there's a lot of good that can be done, but a lot of the hype is really kind of wrecking the progress that we're making in small chunks. So I love talking about AI, but I don't like talking about the AI hype, if that makes sense.
Well, so what progress is being made in small chunks? How is healthcare fundamentally different than all other industries when it comes to people analytics? You've got different outcomes, different cost structures, different constraints. What do they look like? What does it look like to those on the outside that might not be familiar?
So it makes it fundamentally different, essentially.
Yeah.
I think that the scary part about healthcare that people don't fully appreciate is it's one of those industries that is funded to, might be extrapolating, put itself out of business.
Welcome to Directionally Correct, a people analytics podcast with your host, Cole Napper, and today's guest, Dr. Gary Russo, Executive Director of Workforce Intelligence at Providence Health. Hey, Directionally Correct fans. This podcast is dedicated to you to help educate and entertain you on how to effectively bring workforce intelligence and AI into the workplace. If you're looking to stay connected to the podcast, make sure to subscribe to Directionally Correct Substack newsletter, watch videos on Spotify or YouTube, or listen to the podcast on your app of choice. If you're looking to build up your skills this year, sign up for the Data Driven HR Academy at datadrivenhracademy.com, where you'll learn key concepts from Cole's book, People Analytics. And if you're looking to hear from Cole directly, reach out to him at colenapper.com. As always, all opinions are our own, and thanks for being a listener. Dr. Gary Russo, are you getting tired of talking about AI?
Yes, I am. Um, I think that I was never quite part of the hype cycle, and I think there's a lot of good that can be done, but a lot of the hype is really kind of wrecking the progress that we're making in small chunks. So I love talking about AI, but I don't like talking about the AI hype, if that makes sense.
Well, so what progress is being made in small chunks?
Well, when we talk about AI now, a lot of people immediately jump to large language models, generative AI, create a picture out of pick a video out of a picture, or, just use AI for your psychiatrist. But we kind of know from all the various articles the limitations there, the potential for danger. But AI itself has been something that humanity has been striving for. 1980s was a big revolution for robotics, and even before then, we had automatons, which was a way of trying to bring in automation and mimicking human life with mechanical levers. Um, what's useful these days? We have robots that can help automate surgeries. I think computer vision, the ability to look at complex images and categorize things, whether that's counting potatoes on a assembly line or actually identifying cancerous cell types in complex images. I think that type of automation in AI is incredible. There are various types of automation, automated intelligence, not artificial, that I think really do speed things up and increase accuracy in things that are critically important.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I get healthcare is such a different animal to me. And probably it's one of the areas from an analytics perspective I know the least about. Can you kind of give just I don't know if an overview is the right word, but like what is people analytics, workforce intelligence, what is it like in healthcare? What's different? And then like, are the problems different? Is it the model different? Tell me about that.
Right. So it is, from a high level, it's still trying to organize humans to accomplish tasks, but
Mm-hmm.
there are very specific challenges. Um, when you bring a dashboard or some sort of analysis to a leader, they can honestly say, I didn't read your email. I was actively saving lives, and this is not being hyperbolic, right? Like, yeah, it's great that you want me to fill out a survey, but there were 3 people on my unit that needed me to take care of them and, get better, like valid. So it really gives you a specific sense of prioritization
Yeah.
and importance, right? Because you're trying to help. I guess the core task in people analytics in healthcare is how do you maximize the quality of care at the bedside?
Yeah.
And it's a challenging because the people at the bedside usually are the least connected to a lot of the software and tools that we tend to rely on in people analytics as a function overall.
Well, let me ask you a question. Because like we were talking about AI and automation and all that, and I hear about things like robotic surgery. Are surgeons like worried that robots are taking their jobs like everybody else is in other industries, or is it seen as like, oh no, this is producing a net good for society, or like is the discussion the same or is it different?
I think in this case, and I can't speak for a lot of these surgeons that work with these robots directly, but my understanding is that this is really viewed as a net add.
Yeah.
There is a sense of excitement when you can afford to get a new surgical robot. It actually opens up and changes the types of care you can deliver at a facility. It will allow a surgeon to be safer, more effective, actually more ergonomic for themselves, and overall better. So this is really, I mean, surgical robots, even though they are very expensive, can really open doors to care that weren't there before. So it truly is a net add.
Yeah. Gary, you're like a white whale, unicorn, purple, whatever they call it.
Oh no.
You have been leading a people analytics team at the same company, building it for over a decade. If my understanding is correctly, that like
Yeah.
doesn't exist. Everybody plinkos around. They or the there's been people who've been in the space a while, but no one I know has been building the same team like you have, and you have such a unique perspective because of that. What has that experience been like, and tell us about that journey.
So, and I hit my tenure at Providence last month or so. So it has been officially over a decade. So I've been reflecting on this. The journey has been interesting. So when I first started at Providence, there really wasn't a people analytics team. It was more of like the HRIS function doing some analytics, and there was an appetite for more, but they didn't quite know what. So I think it was very much a similar starting point to a lot of companies I speak to these days, where they kind of get the idea of what they want, but it's just not implemented. And those conversations were very different at the very beginning because we were still gaining, I guess, common definitions around what is analytics versus what is reporting. What is workforce planning and why is workforce planning important? And Providence is large, so I like to say that my executives outnumber me. So when I say CHRO, that's plural. There's
Mhm.
50 of them. So there is definitely a lot of setup early on. And I think that's where a lot of teams start. That's the first year to 3 years of defining what it is, getting buy-in from executives, understanding how this analytics thing plays in the sandbox along with reporting and everything else. The best piece of advice I got, maybe by about year 5, is when I was hitting a trough of disillusionment of, hey, I've been here for a while. Have I really made a change? Right? Sometimes it's hard to step back and ask, has it worked? Have we done anything good? The answer is yes, but you can always pinpoint those projects that it's going to take more than 5 years to work. It's going to take a cultural shift. It's going to take some leadership adjustments, overall redesign. And the best advice I received was sometimes you have to have a good idea and then let the organization travel in a big circle and find out its own way and then get back to your good idea and then we can go forward. But sometimes you just have to let the organization travel in a circle and eventually become ready for what you're presenting. So that is a lot of what I found to be different in maybe the 5+ year mark, is watching all of the foundations that have been built actually start to work. You actually prep the soil so you can grow a healthy garden. And then it really is refining. I've hit a point now where it's not just people analytics as a pillar, but it's analytics from HR. How does that actually tie into almost like organizational analytics? We're maturing as a broader function of workforce. And I find it very interesting that a lot of the projects I'm most proud of probably couldn't have existed if I had tried to do it in year 1 through 3. We just didn't have the trust. We didn't have the foundation. We didn't have the kind of reputation of stuff getting done.
It's so interesting. Is there something that our field is missing because there's not more people like you that, make it past the 3 year and the 5 year mark?
I've asked myself a similar question. I think the thing that is missing is probably perseverance. And the reason I say that is you can see it in other leadership structures where projects and visions almost move to an organization with a leader and can sometimes leave the organization with a leader. So you might see this more commonly in CEOs and finance. Someone comes with a big, strong point of view and it's working. And then as soon as that person leaves, unless the next incumbent has the same point of view, it can shift. So I think that what we risk by, I guess, turning over or churning too much on analytics leaders, especially early on, is that the passion and the drive and the stability, the trust of that initial leader leaves with them. And then you have a big set of shoes to fill, right? The moment that that vacuum creates, you have opinions that maybe come in from outside of people analytics or a completely different approach. So I think you lose that continuity of vision that was already set up. It's very difficult to know what that was and maintain it.
Do you think that taking things from relationship therapy and marriage counseling helps to navigate some of these muddy waters?
I do. I get funny looks sometimes. I'm like, oh, marriage counseling. Yeah, there it is. When I said that a lot of the things we do in healthcare is very similar to other organizations, it's just people managing people. Um, there's so much interpersonal relationship that needs to happen. I almost like to say that, I tend to say that an employer employee relationship is like a marriage with a really skewed power imbalance, right? So one partner in the marriage controls the house, the rent, the car, and the other one is just happy to be there and is trying to make things work. And when it's actually very healthy, this works really well. When that dynamic is very much being used to create a hierarchy within that relationship of I am the employer, I am the employee, this starts to fall apart in the same toxic ways that a relationship can. So a lot of the time I've spent in my own therapy and relationship counseling and all of that, a lot of these things really show up in the workplace. It's how do you establish trust with people quickly and maintain that trust? It is how do you understand the responsibility that you have as a partner, what you owe to the other side. So I try to keep this in mind from a people analytics perspective, not only just as a leader, but as an analytics leader of what is my responsibility in this relationship to an employee, in which our decisions can have a lot of power over what happens to them, whether it's determining who gets a sign-on bonus, like which jobs, helping educate on where you position people in the pay range, how do we give people the right training materials to learn and grow. These are all very big responsibilities. So treating it in a empathetic relationship way has helped keep me grounded.
That's so interesting. Do you think your background in neuroscience, if channels any of like how you look at people analytics or like the problems that you solve, or maybe even the industry that you're in?
So, yes, but maybe not in the way that most people would guess first. I like to start by saying, I was a neuroscience researcher and I decided to join HR because I wanted a challenge. And I think that remains true. Um, I was maybe more naive when I was first joining to say, well, people will lie to you and that makes research harder. I think the more grown up version of this is that sometimes people are lying to themselves. They don't know what's wrong yet. They haven't noticed their burnout. They don't really know that something's going wrong and they're unhappy. So it's not necessarily that it's intentional, but it's very much people don't even know all the details about themselves. So how are we supposed to guess at that correctly on their behalf? The thing I learned in neuroscience is that we know almost nothing about this world. So we know broad strokes, but how things are supposed to work, how things in detail are supposed to work that are important for understanding humanity and health and all of that, we have no clue. We don't know the basics. And it gave me the, I guess, tool set and reassurance that you can approach questions that don't actually have answers yet and do so in an ethical way, in a way that can actually lead to real results. So it was kind of that neuroscience and I guess scientific training that kind of prepared me to tackle some of these big questions, knowing that there's no answer at the back of the book.
Well, when there's no answer, you have to be improvisational. Do you have any background in improv?
I do now. So it's been, well, we're coming up on a year. So I've been about a year in improv training. It was in classes. It was really meant to be I want some time for structured fun, get out, meet some new people. It didn't feel quite so stuffy. I'd felt that I'd gotten very corporatized in my mannerisms and speaking, and I just wanted to kind of play a little bit. So it was definitely on a leap, and I didn't know if I'd like it or what it meant. So I joined a free intro class. We spent 2 hours being absolutely ridiculous in front of strangers, and it was a good time. So I took off on improv and said, well, I'm having a good time. It's fun. I need some structured fun. Let's just keep going. And after the first 6, 8 weeks, the initial part of it, I started to realize, it's fun and it's interesting. Let me keep going. I don't want to keep repeating the same class. I don't want to stop. Let me keep going. And I've found out that as I've gotten deeper into it and I've gotten a little bit more into the serious topics, maybe the art form of improv, the acting form versus the play at the very beginning, it really has shown me there's a lot of overlaps between improv and not only analytics, but leadership in general. I'm sure I could spit out a LinkedIn post of the top 10 things I've learned in improv, beyond yes and. But at the end of the day, not only is it self-confidence building, but it really is reinforcing the importance of listening to others, being truly attentive of what's happening so that you can react in the moment appropriately and build and create something interesting.
It's interesting. So, listening to others is important in improv. And earlier, you were talking about how these aren't the words you use, but here's the words I'll use: is if you listen to people, they may tell you things that they don't even know about themselves, right?
Right.
How do we figure out what employees actually need, right? If
Right.
what they're telling us might not even be what they need because they might not even be aware of it.
So I think asking them helps. So shout out to employee listening.
Yeah.
So the I guess there's twofold to this. There is what does the person themselves want and need?
Mm-hmm.
And you can ask them sometimes. It's not that people are completely blind to what they want, but there's also how do you look at the structures surrounding, we'll call it the employee relationship. So there are structures in place, market structures. Pay is a great example. There's an entire specialty of HR dedicated to understanding the fair market wages for a role. one thing is analytics is not only to assist where you can, if you're involved in the comp function, but to really then look and say, okay, if there's a process in place, a people process saying, we actually think a fully competent employee should be at 50% in the range. They should be at the midpoint. Okay, is that actually happening? Right? It's taking the assumptions of we kind of established in like completely separately from an independent person that we think fair pay, competitive pay is the midpoint. Okay, is it true? Are we applying that broadly? Are we applying that fairly? So it's not necessarily waiting for someone to say, I don't think I'm being paid enough. It's actually taking a position as the organization at what we believe fair and competitive pay is and establishing almost like an audit. Are we making good on that promise? Because if your culture, and this is the hard part for a business, you need to actually get leadership to agree, this is our strategy, this is our approach, this is our culture, and we're going to stick to it. That's the real hard part that can take years. But once you have that commitment, then you don't actually have to ask a person anymore, are we paying you right? Because you, as the employer, as the analytics team, are setting that standard. And I always believe in clearly communicating what you can and cannot do. And I think that pay is a great example of that. I would always say that the employee's job is to ask for as much money as humanly possible at all times. Self-advocate. If the company wants to give you $1 million an hour, don't say no. That your job as the person to say yes, that works for me. The employer's job, independent of employees, is to stay in business. Right? If you kind of separate it out. So the middle ground is we want to find a truly open communication of, I want to pay you fairly, but I also want to keep my doors open for more than a week after I start paying you your new wages. And I think that's where people analytics and stepping away from asking a person individually of what they particularly want is build your own standards and expectations for your organization. And say, okay, we believe midpoint is fair. Our strategic position is midpoint. And then make sure, without making the person go beg for it and dig and do the uncomfortable thing, make sure you're doing that for these people, right? So that's where, and then you go back to survey and go, well, did it work, right? It's taking the uncomfort away of making someone have to go through the hoops of the thing that you've already established as appropriate. So if I was going to shorten that down, it's have your own standards as a company. That way you don't have to have someone thinking about every single aspect of their life and be able to iterate it before they get the thing that they should have.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What role does governance play?
So since I'm tired of AI talk, I will leave it at, you don't get AI without governance. But even if we don't go down the path of machines, I have taken over a concept of governance, HR governance at Providence, and I'm actually titling it more strategic governance, like strategic HR data governance. And the reason for that is I view it as there's two aspects of governance. There's we'll call it the data dictionary and or the business facing rules. Everyone knows what turnover means, right? We have a common definition of turnover. We have a common definition of compa ratio. We know when we use it. We know whether it's sensitive. That's the high level. And I view that as closer to strategic. Then there's the more of the operational level or the tactical level of, I want to map every single source field and then how that goes to my Power BI dashboards and how that becomes this data. So both are important. The technical back end part, the connect field to dashboard, is more critical for, let's say, the technical teams and AI down the line. The robot needs to know which field is appropriate for headcount. But for decision making, for leadership discussions, it's the higher level concept, the strategic level of the data dictionary and the business rules. Because full-time equivalent has a different definition in HR than it does in finance, than it does potentially in operations. Because, for example, HR, the position this person is sitting in, we've assigned them 0.6 FTE. It's their position FTE, that's what it is. Finance will come back and say, well, no, it's not. They worked 80 hours this week, or this pay period, so they're at 1 FTE. They worked a full FTE. That's not 0.6, it's 1. And the moment that disagreement happens, the whole conversation shuts down. That's the classic HR and finance can't talk. Someone has to win. Governance is really about saying, are these two in conflict or not? And if they aren't, how do we create clarity? We did this at Providence, for example. We did start to specify this is the position FTE versus the worked FTE. And the moment we just started using those words, all conversations, all the arguments stopped. We started really talking about, okay, those are different for this reason. Which one we want to use when? It makes total sense. And it all quieted down. And the most important effect was people moved on to the next important question.
What explain what that is, a position FTE versus a worked FTE, because maybe that might settle some other companies' debates.
Oh, sure. So the HR, the position FTE, if you hire someone into a role, into a static seat in your HR management system, you say, well, this is a nurse and they work 0.6 FTEs. We expect them to work about half time. That is very static. That sits in your HR system and is very easy to pull. That number doesn't change until they physically transfer jobs. Finance very rarely looks at it that way. They look at actual hours clocked in and out. So if you are a 0.6 FTE and that week you clock 40 hours, then HR still says you're a 0.6. Finance says, no, you're a 1 FTE. You've worked 40 hours that week. You are 1 full-time equivalent. And all of those little differences, whether it's short by an hour or over by half, it all creates this disconnect. So there's the position you were hired for, we'll call it the average or the guarantee, right? We guarantee as an employee, we're going to schedule you at a 0.6. Finance is saying, I don't care what you thought you were going to guarantee them. They worked 40 hours this week and they worked overtime. That matters to us. So the actual worked FTE is much higher, sometimes lower if people are taking time off, for example. So that is the distinction between those two. One is very much useful for establishing, we'll call it the promises, right? You're a 0.6 FTE, so this is the type of benefits you get. This is what you can expect for your accrual rate, so on and so forth. Finance really cares about what actually happened, not the promises we made.
What's rewarding about doing what you do for healthcare in particular?
So the thing that I fell in love with first when I moved from, I guess, academic research science over into healthcare is I was able to do an analysis showing that there was so much overtime and agency being used at this organization that we could actually hire 50 more nurses. And this is a smaller hospital, so it was a big deal. We could hire 50 more nurses safely without ever risking the budget, get more people to the bedside to deliver care almost immediately. So for me, my background in academics, my I guess hope was that my research and my late nights would lead to some foundational discoveries that 20 years from now would lead to some sort of pill that would cure some sort of disease. And I'm very grateful that I was able to have that part of my career. I sometimes go look back at my uh, people who've cited me to see how the field is going, and it would seem that that pathway is still happening. But that's a 20-year road, I guess, runway to potentially help. In healthcare, you can make an analysis that will hopefully influence a leader to make the right decision faster, leading to more care at the bedside. It's very rewarding that when I'm in the States along the West Coast that we have Providence, I might mention Providence when I'm in an Uber or a Lyft, or mention it in a coffee line. And people in the community go, oh, that's awesome. My child was born in Providence. Oh, they were so great. I broke my leg and they helped me and I can walk again. Um, so it's that feeling of like immediate good and then connection to the community that just makes it, I guess, the best feeling in the world when you can be like, oh yeah, I actually help with something that betters the people's lives around me.
Well, healthcare is in for a looming crisis of sorts, right?
Whew. Well, it's been looming for 30 years, but we're here. I always like to joke about like, we've known about like the lack of nurses, the 30 million nurse shortage. That's been 1980s plus. People have been predicting that, and we're finally here. I hope we got ready. But no, we're really experiencing a hard time in healthcare. So even before things like the pandemic, we were already expecting a shortage of nurses. Nurses, other healthcare providers like doctors, support staff like medical assistants, the whole industry. And that's simply because as the world's age has reshaped, we've kind of switched from being a very young global society with a contingent of older generation individuals to kind of flipping that, right? This is the gray tsunami, I think, was one of the wordings. Now our folks like 55 plus will outnumber the workforce in the coming years. And what that brings with it is a big increase in healthcare needs. That's all of the cardiovascular problems, osteoporosis, cognitive decline, everything to do with age. So that is going to skyrocket in need just because people are getting older and have more healthcare needs. And we don't have as many workers. We don't have new nurses. We don't have people in general to do a lot of these jobs. We don't have a lot of healthcare workers. So the demand is getting huge. And this presents a huge problem for workforce planning because you just don't have enough people. And it gets really creative. It's not just, oh, I'm just going to vet people from down the street and bring them over. There's just not enough nurses for the entire industry. So all you're really doing is trying to pluck people and decide where care is occurring, but not increasing the pool. So it absolutely creates this dynamic where we have to think about how do we get people into healthcare for the first time and hopefully stick? How do we get one of my favorite projects recently is the non-traditional career path. There's real evidence of people coming into healthcare from very, I guess, front-facing retail spaces. How do I get your favorite barista to be the one who greets you as the front clerk at a hospital to eventually being the surgical technician that assists with your knee replacement? Right. So it's the non-traditional pathway of attracting people into healthcare, which is a hard ask. It's a tough set of jobs. But how do we get them in there, fall in love with it, and then basically make that their career, advancing through whatever pathway they need, because we need all of it.
Have you figured out any ways of doing that?
So we're working on a couple of ways. The tricky part about healthcare is that you need to experience being in a hospital setting. I've met one or two people that actually got their nursing degree. They went through the education to be a nurse. They spent 2 weeks on the floor in a hospital. I don't know how this happened, but they got their degree without ever giving healthcare. And within 2 weeks, like, I can't do this. This is not for me. And they left and they did something else. Um, so what we've found more success in is our entry level roles, like even our environmental services workers, cleaners, janitors, medical assistants. These very no education required. Get someone in who's great people skills, and just have them experience being in a hospital. Because if you do well in a hospital setting, if it doesn't bother you, if it energizes you, the rest is skills, right? There's a reason we have certifications and degrees. If you are great in a hospital setting, we can educate you. There's ways to get you free or reduced cost certifications to get you into healthcare and delivering health directly, and then we can go from there in advance. So really, a lot of our approaches have been, can we get you to come just do anything at the hospital and see who actually thrives, and then go from there.
Are you hungry, Gary?
A little bit.
You want to eat some fire?
Oh, I don't have my torch with me. It's over in the other room.
I was like, you
I was
told me to eat
debating it, but
fire.
if we were doing a nighttime podcast, I'd say yes.
How does one get into the habit of eating fire?
So the first trick is to not actually eat it, because that will reduce your career very quickly. Um, no, so yeah, I'm actually back into eating fire again. Uh, of all the random hobbies I've picked up, this one was in college. I learned how to perform with fire implements, so mostly a fire staff, but also eating fire and other things like that. And honestly, it was one of those things of, well, that looks kind of cool. I want to do it. Isn't that like the best job fair ever? Is someone walks by and goes, "Oh, cool, I want to do that," and then they go do it. So yeah, no, I actually performed with fire for 6 years actually, mostly fire staff. Eventually started leading a club, an organization at the University of Arizona, and did some paid shows and all of that. Um, but yeah, no, still have a fire torch in the other room, and occasionally do stupid things and keep the skills brushed up.
That's awesome. Well, you want to join me in Cole's Corner?
Let's do it.
Welcome to Cole's Corner. All right. This is going to be probably related, but first question I've got for you, if you weren't into neuroscience or people analytics, what would you have done with your career? Would you have been a sword fighter, perhaps?
I don't know. I like the Renaissance Fair, but I don't know if I would want to live it. Right? I knew that circuit, so I don't think was for me. The thing that I was looking into doing, one of my teachers in high school actually took me to a technical university when I was graduating high school as an alternative path, because my path was pretty well set. I was pretty certain I'm going to go to a university, study something sciencey. And I really enjoyed and was good at 3D animation, like the early 3D animation type thing, and art. So he took me to an art college which had a video game industry bend, um, well before AI. And I was seriously considering it for a little while. I really enjoyed creating these characters and kind of creating something from nothing, and almost like bringing fantasy to life.
Yeah.
So it might have been the video game industry, something creative.
Maybe that's why we didn't really talk about it, but the build versus buy, you told me in preparation for this, you've always been a builder when it came to people analytics. Do you think that's kind of the same thought there?
I think so. I think there's a lot of passion, um, that I have, but many have in the space. When people say, well, why won't Excel or Power BI go away? Why can't they do the centralized thing? Like, well, people love to build. I mean, and there's a lot of career stability in building for audiences. So, yeah, I think I personally get joy out of it. I feel like a little bit Bob Rossi when I'm making a good Excel spreadsheet. So it's very comforting to just kind of get in the zone and build. I know I'm not supposed to use Excel, but it's still, a guilty pleasure.
You're not supposed to use it. It's just people who do repeatable tasks. You should probably have some kind of code-based system for doing that. But if you're just building something in Excel, there's nothing wrong with that.
I definitely am guilty of overbuilding things in Excel. It now I would say they're very good because you can apply good design thinking to an Excel workbook. But that being said, it probably shouldn't have been in a workbook.
Yeah.
But I think it's also partly true. Being in healthcare for most of actually the entirety of my professional career, outside of like academic science, budget is such a critical resource. I've had the, I guess, honor of working for not for profit, and every dollar saved is like a dollar that goes to children's bicycle helmets or free health screenings or reduced or free care. I think Providence in the last couple of years been giving out, I guess, $2 billion a year in like reduced or free care and other community benefits. So every time it's like a build versus a buy, it always kind of tilts more toward, well, could we honestly do that more cost effectively, get more out of it, make it more sustainable? So it's rare where I can find something there's like, I guess there's a balance. It's rare to find something that's so incredibly good that's worth the premium of what could be going back to the community. right? So it makes it easier almost to curate the things that are valuable versus just picking up a collection of things we bought because they were cool.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, the next question I've got for you is what's the place you've never been to that you most like to go and why?
There's a large number. A friend just got back from a 2 week horseback trip through Mongolia, and now that's gone up on my list. But I'm probably going to say Japan, closer to like maybe Kyoto or the northern portions. I just find the geography super interesting. For a similar reason, South Korea, just the entire island is mountains, is just this incredible idea to me. So I think that that's where I'd like to go, probably next on the trip list. Because I've done a lot of European and Mediterranean type gallivants, but I have not been over into Asia.
Yeah. Squid Games fan, I see.
I don't know. People are like, what universe do you want to join? And people are like Squid Games. I'm like, no, you don't.
Well, speaking of that, if you were a character in any book, TV show, or movie, who would you be and why?
Oh no. Let's see. That is really hard. Um, so I just finished the Dragon Riders of Pern series, which is like a 1970s novel set, and this really interesting combination of sci-fi and fantasy. So I can pretty safely say that I wouldn't regret. There's a character Flar who's basically in charge of dragon riders in this science fiction planet, and that sounds pretty cool. That doesn't sound like a bad thing at all.
I'm sure everyone in our audience knows who Flar is from this series, so that's gonna resonate with everybody.
I was hoping for something a little bit off the. It's almost like, hey, you know what? I could say a common thing, but let's if you haven't read the Dragon Riders of Pern, go look it up.
Okay. I got one big question for you. We kind of touched on this earlier, but I'm just fascinated by this, and so the question is this: how is healthcare fundamentally different than all other industries when it comes to people analytics? You've got different outcomes, different cost structures, different constraints. What do they look like? What does it look like to those on the outside that might not be familiar?
So it makes it fundamentally different, essentially.
Yeah.
I think that the scary part about healthcare that people don't fully appreciate is it's one of those industries that is funded to, might be extrapolating, put itself out of business. Um, a lot of reimbursements come from Medicare and Medicaid. And the prevailing theory is that you want to make sure that if someone's coming in to get treatment and health, that they don't come back because they should be healthy, they shouldn't come back, there are penalties. So, in essence, now, and I would say for a good reason, you are reimbursed as a healthcare system if you are able to treat someone, make them well, and then they don't come back because they're healthy again. But that model also suggests it's one of those things of it's almost the opposite of planned obsolescence. People get very annoyed that the refrigerator breaks every 5 years. It's absolutely the opposite. We're trying to keep people as well as possible and out of the hospital system and out of doctors' offices because not only is it good for the community, but that's how we get reimbursed. So in essence, in a perfect world, no one comes in because everyone's healthy. So we're really trying to put ourselves out of business, both in our reimbursement models, but also just because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, it seems to be sort of at odds with the rise in chronic disease, though, right? I mean, it seems like that's becoming more and more of an issue every year.
It is. And as I'm not an expert on healthcare policy, I will try to keep it vague so I don't embarrass myself too much. But
We're only directionally
there's
correct here on the directionally
I
correct.
know this is vibes based review. Um, Ultimately, though, healthcare is very interesting because I guess the most likely place you are to be reimbursed is in a medical office or a hospital. And even for that, it's certain things, surgeries, for example. But a lot of stuff that we do is either cost neutral or it's actually costing us money. Getting care in the home, getting care in the community, all of those things, they don't really get reimbursed in the same way. So it's a really important thing for us to be discussing that one, our hospitals are already full, and demand's only going to get bigger. But also, there really isn't a reimbursement model for people that come into your home and check on you there or go in the community. It literally is a very different model to the extent that we can't even get as many new nurses into non-hospital settings to learn the ropes because there's not funding for them to get trained. So we really, as a country, as a society in general, really need to think about what does healthcare look like as far as the place of care, and how are we going to support people with those needs. That's something that we still need to catch up on.
Yeah.
If you're looking to explore fresh perspectives, dive into compensation tech, or just enjoy a lively conversation and debates about the evolving world of total rewards, you're in the right place. Welcome to Totally Rewarding Chats, where we discuss the future of compensation, benefits, talent, and all things HR tech. I'm Sean Luchins, VP of Product Strategy at Salary.com, bringing years of product and development perspective. Joining me is the bow tie wearing, comp tech loving, experienced guru Paul Ryman, founder and managing partner of Novo Insights. Together, we'll be jamming with guests and sharing candid, unfiltered conversations about total reward strategy, compensation technology, talent trends, and anything else we find interesting in the world of HR.
Let's do some what am I reading? Let's start with some research by a guy named Kai Ruggery at Columbia. He's a part of this 261 person research team that did this research across 92 different countries with 53,000 people. I was thinking, who could I bring on that would talk about this research? And I was like, Gary's in healthcare. He'd probably care about this. And so what they found of these 53,000 people across the globe is generally mediocre mental health, financial pessimism, and worrying patterns of social isolation. And so they had these 6 findings. People are burnout and do not feel capable of dealing with the next crisis. Relationships and feeling of purpose were the most positive domains. Young people are no longer the happiest or healthiest, or even the most optimistic. Loneliness is climbing with age, and our aging populations are showing it. Higher education attainment is linked significantly better to well-being, and it's not even close. And mixing remote and in-person work associated with the greatest mental health and well-being, so better than being either 100% in person or 100% remote. So did you have any thoughts about this? I think there's some interesting meat on the bone here, but from just a societal background. But what did you think about this one?
So, I mean, I would say that I spend a little bit too much time online. So that registers with a lot of the sentiments. I always like to test research against Reddit to see if we're seeing populations overlap there. I think it's dead on. So the pessimism thing is really, I guess, a good term for it. Probably the lack of stability, I think, that people were promised maybe when they were a kid. We think back to millennials, like the conversation was really, millennials were kind of the generation that got promised this sunshine and rainbows future, because if you look at like the line keep going up, so it's going to be great for millennials. And then we had economic 2008 crash, we've had various wars, kind of stability has started to erode, and I don't think that's really solved. We've seen instability kind of in all of our big aspects of life now, including how we interact with each other. Right. I feel grateful that I was able to go through my formative years in college in which like social media didn't exist or was kind of still new, is more of a side thing.
Mm-hmm.
there's this buffer, this global buffer of how am I doing versus social media, where people are either A, highlight reeling what they're capable of, two, lying, or three, you're seeing the best of the best across the global space. So there really is no ability to shut down outside voices and stop comparing yourself to something ridiculous. So I think no matter where you're at, if you combine, I guess, people themselves being very uncertain, you're always wondering if you're doing the right thing or what's the next thing or could I be doing better. Just as a person, that's just a thing that could happen. Then you see examples of not only are other people maybe enjoying the things that you envy, but also, well, I didn't even know there was a war in that country. Now I'm stressed about that. It just your uncertainty will be happily reinforced by almost everything around you these days. So it makes total sense that we're in this spot of pessimism and worry.
Yeah. I think you covered a lot of the good stuff there. I'll just add one point, which is for a while on the podcast, kept covering the return to office debate. Is being 100% remote good? Is being in the office better for productivity? Yada, yada, yada. I kept saying over and over again, I was like, you realize it's just a mixture of both, right? Both sides are like at war with one another. Like, our way is the only way. And it was nice to actually see some research that came out and said, a mixture of both is actually the best for people's mental health. I'm like, oh, see, finally, somebody agrees. So that was nice to see as well.
I'm going to cherry pick that one and we're going to run with it.
Yeah.
No, it was good to see it. I think, and that registers. If you think about when we talk about flexibility, what does workforce and workplace flexibility mean? Hybrid type of work, I guess intentional in-person work, maybe I'll phrase it that way, seems to be a really good balance. If only because if we want to go back down to brass tacks, going back into office can be very expensive for an individual.
Yeah.
I would also it just struck me the other week because I was whining about this a little bit. There was an in-office war for a long time for talent attraction. It got so bad that the startups were like, we've got a foosball table and we've got beer, and then Google was like, we've got a sushi line. Like it was, we made in office like an event because that was how you attracted people to work. And after COVID, a lot of these RTO mandates come back into the office. It's bare, it's empty, and it's almost like that we just, I guess, communally forgot that creating almost like an extra good office environment was kind of the social contract to bring people into that location. And after COVID, it's almost like, well, now you just have to come back, and there's not even coffee at the facilities anymore. And it's one of those things of, well, that's not even returning to pre-pandemic back into the office. It's almost like people have silently accepted that things have been taken away and we're not going to talk about it. So it just struck me that this is not the same conversation as we had prior to kind of the global shutdowns. It's almost reset the dynamics, but no one's talking about it.
Yeah, they're just like, suck it up. That seems to be sort of the mantra. The thing I think about is like, you ever been to like a junior high or a high school? They look awfully a lot like a prison. And it's like, well, if you remove all of the amenities of an office, it's kind of just a work prison, And so it's like maybe that those things were there for a reason to kind of humanize work so people don't feel like this is such just a transactional relationship.
Well, and if your stated your desire for return to office is innovation, creativity, collaboration, and culture, you know, I don't know many artists that thrived in a white box with a canvas.
Yeah.
Right. You need to surround yourself with things that are inspiring to create inspired work. And, if you just bring yourself, bring people back into a cube and then say, create innovation, that's really asking for something that's counter to humanity.
Yep. Well, let's pivot into the next article we've got. I'm loving some of the stuff she's been putting out. Whitney, I'm not sure if you pronounce it Hosea, I think is how you say it, has started a new medium. It's called People Analytics has a strategy problem disguised as a skills gap. What actually prevents analytics from influencing decisions. And she goes through and talks about a pattern everyone sees but nobody names, which is we talk about dashboards in particular, and people aren't using them once they get published, and then we say, okay, so they're just not data fluent enough yet. We need to make it even more simple. And she said, here's what's really happening. Your stakeholders aren't using your analytics because they think that they don't actually need to. And so we call a skill gap, i.e., like a data literacy or a data fluency gap, is actually a strategy gap, which is someone needs the information that's in your dashboard. They know it's there, they know how to access it, they've been trained, and they email you asking for the report anyway. I'm sure you've never experienced this, Gary. So tell me about what did you think about this article? I think she did an excellent job describing it. But have you ever experienced the skills gap that's actually a strategy gap?
No, yes. So I would say it's almost like a merit badge when you're in analytics that needs to happen to you for you to get like past Cub Scout level. Um, you know, and I think I want to. I had two reactions to it. One, I think it's dead on. Um, People are fully capable of two button clicks to get to the right thing. Um, Having found resistance to people, being trained to essentially set their own default so that we can sit on a phone once together and then press a button so that it just defaults to that. And then that still being too far of a stretch to not email. It's not a skills issue. I think there's two human parts of this that come out. The first one is the need for reassurance. I've definitely had this is I guess the benefit over sitting in the same organization for many years of watching leaders that were very low in confidence. They probably could click the button, but they had this anxiety about doing it wrong. And going to your favorite analysts that you trust that have helped you so far is really a good layer of reassurance, like a security blanket, to make sure that everything's fine. Um, and then two, it almost a context gap, because it's not necessarily that the dashboard is wrong. It is that the person who is coming to you that needs the headcount chart or turnover isn't 100% sure that's what they need, because they've been asked to deliver something, usually in business lingo, and they're like, I think I need turnover, which they could objectively do, but they don't know that's the solution. And when we talk about the strategy gap, I think that's what resonated most deeply is if the business is not clear of what it needs in the first place, then you are going to get a lot of ad hoc requests for standard data, because people just don't actually know that it's standard data, like deep down, like in the gut, they don't know that that's the right answer, even though they can click the button. So I try to like keep it, I'm always sensitive to maybe that being the problem that we're trying to solve, which is infinitely harder to solve, but it comes up a lot. But I can absolutely empathize that, yes, it's not, people are fully capable of clicking buttons. There are people that I can navigate apps that I could never do. Like it's attached to their thumb. Um, it's not implicitly a skills issue. So if it's not that, what is it? And oftentimes it's just people just don't have the mental capacity left to be confident and just clicking the buttons themselves.
So the next article you read that says the top 5 concerns for people analytics in 2026, and it says data fluency is like the number one issue. We can now say that is safely debunked. So thank you for doing that.
That's it. Yeah. Well, I guarantee that they're still there, but like it's a certain level. If your chief operating officer is asking you for metrics, it is not a data fluency problem.
Not a data fluency problem, people. Thank you. All right, let me hit you with the last one really quick. LinkedIn post from a guy named Quentin Galea. He's a causal researcher. And he's citing this article called The Big Data Fallacy. When the N is large, correlation equals causation, for some researchers in Europe. And he said, we identify a critical mistake that the tendency to erroneously infer causation from correlation when sample sizes are large enough. Large samples improve precision, but not bias. All right. Do you mind if I get on a soapbox here for a second?
You roll with it.
Everything in this article is correct. And it does not necessarily apply to people analytics. And so one of the things you see in kind of a frequentist statistics background is people assume everything is sampling when in reality, and so you're trying to infer a population mean from a sample. That doesn't apply to people analytics. A lot of times in people analytics, you have the population. If your company has 10,000 people and you have data on all 10,000, that's the population. It's not a sample of the population. And so therefore, if, you count all 10,000 and 60% of the people say, that they're, to use your example from earlier, not being paid enough, we can causally say that 60% of the people responded that way. It's not a sampling error or bias. It's just that is what the data says. And so one of the things that always irks me is when people talk about whether things are correlation or causation, they don't know what the prerequisites of causation are. And it's that they are correlated, which is funny because to be causal, it has to be correlated. A has to always come before B, and B never comes before A. That there's a nomological or logical relationship, like theoretical, why this occurs, and that all alternatives have been, disproven at a certain point. Like that's the definition of causality. I don't know. Did you have any thoughts on this one? I find it interesting that, people always like correlation is not causation. I'm like, well, sometimes in people analytics, it like what the data says is what it says.
No, I agree with you. And I think that ultimately in people analytics, there's an ethical concern about truly trying to create a sample population.
Yeah.
Because I don't envy people who have to be like, oh, I want to A/B test and then pay some people more and not pay other people more just to see what happens. That's not ethical. That's not very cool. Let's not do that. But overall, I agree. We do have the luxury in a lot of cases of we get everybody. Yeah. And that's rare. We could probably split hairs depending on the project and say, well, if we're trying to design like a comp structure, we can determine what our current employee population says, essentially. But what we're really trying to do is predict forward to our future hires. You could split hairs.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, this thing kind of came up in neuroscience as well. What we're trying to do is establish that A arrow B. And that the tricky part about that is you might have 15 steps that we don't know about living inside of that arrow. But A still cause B. And I think that when I pay attention to these arguments, it's like, well, to what end are you trying to argue this statistical basis? Are you trying to use it to discount something that's also intuitively correct, and can be supported, or are you actually concerned that we're on a decision that actually could cause, we're on a precipice, and we could cause harm on either side? We got to get this right. And if you're splitting hairs because you're trying to get it right, then I think that warrants the nuanced conversation. But otherwise, I think you're literally, there are easier ways to say, I don't want to believe you. And I want to just be very clear on which discussion we're having when we have those discussions.
Yeah, we're not saying ice cream does cause shark attacks. That would be a spurious argument to make. But Gary, it's been fun having you on here. You're clearly very knowledgeable about the space. Probably should have had you on here earlier. But this has been a really great podcast. Where can people find you if they want to reach out?
Yeah, easiest way to find me is on LinkedIn, Gary Russo, PhD. And I am still a small enough, attentive enough person that if you reach out and want to chat, I'll still be able to get a hold of you.
Oh, you'll regret that. All right. Well,
I know.
It's been fantastic. So you've been listening to Directionally Correct, People Analytics Podcast with your host, Cole Napper, and today's guest, Gary Russo. Thanks for joining me, Gary.
Hey, thank you, Cole. I appreciate it.